Hey, good evening, Mo.
Hey, good evening. How are you, Andrew?
I'm good. How about yourself?
Good, good. Yeah, thank you.
So I'm sitting here with
Good.
Marge and Amy. Do you want to say hello?
Hello. Oh wait.
Hi, Mo.
Hi, Marge. Hi, Marge. Hi, Amy.
Hey.
Hey, how are you?
Good.
I'm still sharing it out. I'm late.
Mo, to start us off, can you just speak about for what you're convicted of, the circumstances surrounding it, and everything, and then we can just get into taking questions since there's a lot of people here that were here last time when you were on. And
Okay. Um, yeah, basically, I was convicted of spousal homicide of my wife back in the incident happened in February 2009. The conviction happened in March 2011. Um, one thing I wanted to do, I heard the last time when we were on the call, Amy had mentioned a case citation of People versus Walker because I had
Hold
shared
on,
with
Matt.
what's that? Uh, I had shared with you that so far the battered spouse syndrome evidence has not been applied in on behalf of a man in any exorcise case. So I think someone on your poll had mentioned the case of People versus Walker. So I have now gone through that case, and I wanted to point out that that particular citation is erroneous in this case for at least three reasons. First, this case does not even involve any presentation of the expert testimony of battered spouse syndrome. No expert was called by the defense counsel, and the court itself notes that wherever there was no defense or evidence of insanity or of intoxication or mental illness or defect.
Andrew, people are having trouble hearing.
um, well, I have my speaker turned all the way up. Mo, can you try to speak a little bit louder? People are saying that it's hard to hear you.
Yeah, they're saying it's muffled.
So, okay, basically it's a Wi-Fi line, so I'll try to speak as loud as I can. So basically, the case cites that there's no defense of any mental illness or defect presented in this case of any kind. And then there are three key points that happens that in this case, the gentleman named Jeff Walker was convicted not only of the spousal homicide of his wife, but also soliciting the murder of the suspected witness. So battered spouses, they just kill their abusers. They don't seek to murder unrelated parties. So that data point itself does not jive with how the syndrome works. Number two, Mr. Walker talks about how it took him, he planned the homicide over weeks and months, and this is inconsistent with the delay of a few hours that's involved in the battered spouse syndrome. And then the other thing he did, he tried to blame the homicide on burglars or home invaders. This is also inconsistent with the battered spouse syndrome because battered spouses after the homicide, they don't lie or run away or hide the homicide. They're typically the first ones to call the police to inform them that something has happened, and they typically confess right away. And the reason for that is that in their minds they believe they've acted in self-defense. And the third point is it requires a jury instruction by the judge on the issue of battered spouse syndrome. So the judge gave no such jury instruction, and the defense called no such expert at all. So this, and the fourth point is that in this case, Mr. Walker himself said he's a battered husband, but hundreds of people say that, but that doesn't satisfy the requirements for battered spouse syndrome, which requires evidence as well as psychiatric testing and the expert testimony, none of which was presented. And then he used that statement from the Mr. Walker to request a conviction on a lower charge. So he was using it as a mitigation defense, whereas battered spouse syndrome is a justification defense. So for those 4 or 5 reasons cited, But this particular case is not relevant. Plus, it goes back to 1983. So essentially, basically in 40 plus years, even if this is true, no such evidence has been presented on behalf of a man, which basically reiterates the point I was trying to make, is that currently the judicial system itself is biased against men. And the reason for that is that the current judicial system operates on a theory called gender-based violence theory, which is completely opposite of the medical science theory that adverse childhood experiences create abusers. The other point that was brought up at the last call was that there was indication made that in my individual case, it could have been premeditation because her last act of abuse happened on February 12th around 2:30 p.m. and the homicide happened around 6 p.m., so there was a delay of about 4 hours. So there's a very good case called Pakistan versus Oklahoma, which is 840 Pacific .2D1, which basically explains that why the extended time frame happened, because the battered is constantly in a heightened state of terror. So, like in a traditional homicide, imminent danger happens when the person is being attacked by the offender. In the battered spouse case, the imminent danger is constantly present, even when the abuser is not abusing the battered spouse. So there's a very good citation from a case called People versus Seeley, which is 683 in New York State, 2D 795, in which the court says that while a situation may appear to have an escape, and the time difference between the defendant's action and the alleged abuse may be significant, defendant's action being homicide, and the alleged abuse time difference may be significant. Battered spouse syndrome explains the mindset of an abused spouse, where the mental state is very different, so that the delay time happens. And lastly, Smolin is a good example. The Maryland versus Smolin, which is 844, Atlantic 2D 449, in which it says that the courts around the country have recognized that simply because the triggering behavior, i.e. the homicide and the basic episodes, are divided by time, it does not negate reasonableness of the defendant's perception of imminent harm. So the point being that the abuse victim is constantly in the mindset of imminent harm. And to illustrate that, I just want to share 3 quick examples. One is
Is it possible for us to talk point by point, because it's hard when you're lecturing us?
Okay. Go ahead.
All right. So I do want to back up to one thing. I would like for everybody who's in here to please look at my picture. Do you see what it says? Marge, what's that say?
People versus Walker, the battered husband defense.
Thank you. So it absolutely is about the battered husband, and it does talk about all of that. Just because see, you put way too much thought into this, because you simply said that no one has ever put this forth. No attorney has ever put this forth. And the thing of it is that when you speak in definitive language, that's when it gets real easy to start poking holes in things. So because you use definitive language, I gave you just one, and that was it. But then I saw your messages to Andrew after that. And your messages to Andrew started moving the goalpost. So it went from, it was no one had ever done it, to no one had ever done it, and given this jury instruction, nobody had ever done it, and da 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 da. No, you kept moving it, and from that very first point of it had never been done. And that's the thing, is I don't dispute the fact that men can be abused. I don't dispute the fact that men do get abused. I don't dispute the fact that the system does not seem to recognize that. But I think that's more of a societal thing because we're too busy teaching little boys that, you know, they can't feel things, that we're okay with them expressing rage and things like that, but we're not okay with them crying because they're a girl or, you know, whatever. I 100% agree with all of that. So you took what I said and you ran with it in 25 different directions instead of just understanding that what I had to say had to do with using definitive language.
Okay. I don't have access to your picture, but I assume
I'll
you're
send it to
talking
you.
about where the defendant talks. I don't know how you can.
I can attach it on Securus.
Are you talking about an excerpt from the People versus Walker?
No, I'm talking about it is the picture from the Department of Justice that says it is a whole thing about People versus Walker, the battered husband defense. That is literally the title of it.
Okay. Well, as I have read this case and I have walked you through, that this case did not involve a presentation of battered spouse syndrome or battered husband syndrome at all. No expert.
Then why would the Department of Justice use that in their title?
Because nearly 99% of the things coming out of the Department of Justice on the issue of domestic violence are completely wrong. And the reason behind that is the domestic violence policy inside the Department of Justice is run by an organization called the Office on Violence Against Women. That office applies the gender-based violence theory and educates the whole media, judges, and courts with the gender-based violence indoctrination, which is completely wrong. And the best way to look at the performance of the Department of Justice on this issue is before the start of the gender-based violence movement back in the 1970s, husbands and wives were killing each other at about an equal rate of 1,200. And Andrew, I've mailed you a copy of this graph, so about more than a month ago. So if you may want to post this graph on your podcast, there are two lines. So line one shows the number of homicides of women from 1975 to 2025, so almost a 50-year period. It has stayed almost flat at around 1,200. So despite the fact that in this 50-year period we have spent more than $50 billion on trying to reduce homicides of women, the Department of Justice has failed to reduce a single homicide of women in 50 years despite wasting $50 billion. So when you look at the line, hold on, let me finish. When you look at the line representing the intimate partner homicide,
1 minute left.
That line has dropped from 1,200 down to about 300. So that's a 75% drop. And I think my line is about to go down, so I'll call right back in.
Okay.
And Andrew, on the issue of this Department of Justice thing, that is a very big problem because virtually everything that's coming out of the Department of Justice on the issue of domestic violence is completely wrong. And I have sent you a letter dated April 5, 2021, which delineates about top 10 reasons or ways that the Department of Justice manipulates data. And this is published by various scientists that are cited in there. One of the very big things that the Department of Justice studies do is to use non-representative samples, which means basically this Office on Violence Against Women, they will go and survey women from the shelters and then extrapolate, generalize that sample to the whole population, which is a completely non-representative sample. The other way, what they do is Department of Justice studies, they survey only women, not men. And then with women, they ask them only questions about their domestic violence victimization, not perpetration. So with this kind of biased survey instrument, they don't ever collect data on domestic violence by women. And so the survey designs are also completely erroneous. So this particular paper, which I have sent you and I'll resend it to you, delineates all sorts of ways in how Department of Justice publishes completely fraudulent studies on the issue of domestic violence. And the reason is that, think about the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. Department of Justice at that time had become so foolish that it honestly believed that the true victims were the slave owners. And
Okay, hold on. And please don't complain to Andrew that you're being interrupted, because you're really going from so many points that we can't talk about anything. And the other thing too is that I would appreciate if there could be actual dialogue instead of reading from notes and stuff like that.
okay.
Okay, so backing up to Walker, if you read the same exact thing that I did, it says very specifically the gist of the defendant/appellant's testimony, as well as that of other defense witnesses, was to the effect that Walker was an emotionally battered husband. ... It goes on and says that he was emotionally a battered psychological state. It says that in there. And another source that is talking about the same exact thing, it says in Walker, Jefferson D. Walker was convicted on first-degree unaliving of his wife, even though he defended on the ground that he was a battered husband. This is a completely separate source. So the point of it is, it goes back to that definitive language. If you could just accept the fact that it has been used before, I'm good. We can move on. You don't have to keep going in and trying to support it with everything else. Then my next question is, if this has never been presented before, did you present it in your case?
Amy, first, you're incorrect on coming to the conclusion that it was presented. Just because a defendant claims that they are an emotionally battered spouse, it does not make it qualified to be a battered spouse syndrome defense. In order for it to be qualified as a battered spouse syndrome defense, you need to present an expert witness who testifies to the emotional trauma. Like, there are very specific symptoms that are associated with a battered spouse syndrome. Are you familiar with
Okay,
that?
so are you saying that that was the rule in 1983 just because that might have been the rule, now? Because if I'm not mistaken,
Because
the procedures and stuff like that we have over the years have evolved with things that we have discovered and whatnot. So my point is, you can't sit here and say, well, in 1983, you had to do this.
because the battered spouse syndrome defense is being used since late 1970s. So in 1983,
But we're talking about with men. Men would have been emerging.
Well, there are several cases from the early 1980s where the battered spouse syndrome defense has been presented, and in order to present that defense, you need to bring in an expert witness. Just by defendant claiming I'm a battered spouse, it does not qualify that to that level. And in the case itself, the judge never gave the jury the instruction of the battered spouse syndrome at all, because no such expert testimony was presented to the jury. So you have a lot of cases of women saying they're abuse victims, but they don't present an expert witness. So those cases don't qualify. So I think you're making the incorrect assumption that just because a defendant says he's a battered spouse, that does not qualify for it to become a battered spouse syndrome case. You need to present.
Okay, did you present an expert on your behalf, or as the defendant, should we accept what you're saying?
Okay, here's what happened in my particular case. I was diagnosed by Dr. Natasha Cervantes, and he's a medical doctor, as suffering from the battered spouse syndrome. Now, in the battered spouse syndrome, there are typically about 24 different symptoms that go into the mindset of the battered spouse. So typically, when a medical doctor or team of doctors interview a battered woman after the homicide, they talk to her and they look for these symptoms as she describes what was going on in the abusive relationship. Are you familiar with any of the symptoms?
It was a simple yes or no.
Okay.
Did you present it at court? And if not, should we just accept what you, as a defendant, is telling us?
If you can let me finish, what I'm trying to say is that when a doctor diagnoses a patient with a battered spouse syndrome, they look for these symptoms. Some of these symptoms are like constant feeling of fear and terror, learned helplessness. They become emotionally dependent. They feel trapped. They feel they are in a terrorist hostage relationship. A lot of symptoms of PTSD. So there are about 24 such symptoms. Now, in my case, when these doctors examined me, even before they came to examine me, they went through a whole bunch of documented emails between my wife and I, and they had already flagged several emails that flagged these symptoms in me as I was talking about them in my emails to my wife. So even when they came to interview me or examine me, they had a whole documented ammunition to work with. And at the time, I did not know anything about the battered spouse syndrome or its symptoms. So they were able to walk me through the emails and dig deeper into them. So then my lawyers presented to the judge that you will be presenting the battered spouse syndrome defense. Now, there's a slight difference between battered spouse syndrome and battered husband syndrome. In a battered husband syndrome, you kind of need two experts. One expert is the psychologist who looks at the mental state of the defendant, and the second expert is a social science expert, which explains the systematic sex discrimination in the system, which basically abuses men by a second abuser, i.e. the judicial system, which does not recognize or help battered men. Okay, so this information was presented to the judge. When he presented this to the judge, the district attorney was shocked, and he himself came to the court that this whole thing is a fraud, it has no basis, it has never been done. So he's on the record saying all those things. Afterwards, the judge denied my defense for battered spouse syndrome, mocking the idea that men cannot be victims of domestic violence by women. And the pretext he used is that the defense was introduced too late, which was also false because the judge had sent out an email and we met the deadline that was written out in the email. Anyways, when he denied the defense, I mailed a copy of that article by Dr. Donald Dutton, which I sent to Andrew. That article, and it has also available online, and I gave you the digital object identifier to that article. And that article basically summarizes about 162 published scientific studies showing how men are equal or greater victims of domestic violence and how they are being disbelieved and re-victimized by the judicial system. After the judge my own lawyers were not willing to present that article to the judge. So that's how I knew it myself. So after the judge read that article, at the next hearing, he himself reversed his earlier ruling and allowed the battered spouse syndrome to go forward. So technically, it was approved. But at this point in time, the domestic violence coalitions in Buffalo, the Family Justice Center, and law professor at the SUNY Domestic Violence Law Clinic, they all started a public campaign to demonize and abuse and bully these experts thoroughly, to the point that they all dropped out on the eve of trial and ran away. And then later on, I find out this is not unique to my case. This is what is being done in virtually every case, not only in the judicial system, but this is what is also being done in every legislature. So even when the Violence Against Women Act was being enacted, none of the scientists were allowed to testify. None of the medical doctors were allowed to testify. So the whole law is completely blindsided. You know, the whole law, the entire legal system does not have a clue as to what causes domestic violence. They have been completely brainwashed that it is gender-based violence, which basically says that misogyny, gender inequality, toxic masculinity, and power differences between the sexes in a patriarchal system causes domestic violence, which is complete bullshit.
So the answer is
Okay,
no.
well, hang on. I've been very patient here.
Oh, by the way, you
Very.
asked us to have an expert up here, so we have one. I have another one who might be coming too. But so the
Uh,
answer is no. Go ahead, character.
Absolutely not, sir. Absolutely not. But I do want to make clear. Hang on, you had your time, and now it's my time.
Study in the world. There's not a single scientific study in the world that supports the gender-based violence theory at all. And the proof is in the pudding, because if there was any validity in the gender-based violence theory, it would have been saving lots and lots of lives of women. Instead, when you look at the intimate partner homicide data, what we see that the Department of Justice is presiding over 30,000 incremental homicides of women over men, which is atrocious. I mean, the United Nations has held that 8,000 killings of Bosniak in 1995 was a genocide. So by this standard, what the Violence Against Women Act and the Department of Justice is doing is a genocide of women. It's shameful because this theory is completely wrong.
But you're talking I'm sorry, but you're talking as though the judicial system is somehow pro-woman. Am I following this? That you feel that it's more pro-women than pro-man?
Look, the problem in domestic violence is that it is not a gender issue. The problem in domestic violence is that when a child suffers adverse childhood experiences, which could be childhood abuse or abandonment or neglect or exposure to domestic violence between parents, that experience produces some psychological injuries. And those psychological injuries, the top three of them are internalized shame, insecure attachments, and personality disorders. The most prevalent personality disorder among abusers is borderline personality disorder. So when an abuser abuses or has an addiction to control their spouse, it is being unconsciously driven by borderline personality disorder. Are you familiar with how the borderline personality works?
I mean, I'm not a psychiatrist, but yes, and I'm also my training is in trauma recovery and PTSD. So I'm not disagreeing, right? I'm not disagreeing that children who grow up in dysfunctional homes, that it's not sort of like learned behavior, and that trauma can cause certain behavior. I'm not disagreeing with that. I guess I'm just trying to figure out, and I say this respectfully, what is your point?
Okay, my point is that current policy that blames men as the cause of domestic violence is wrong. It's wrong not only legally under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, but it is wrong on a scientific basis because there's no scientific studies to support that gender causes it. It's not a gender issue. Men and women do not hate each other. My point is that this law, the Violence Against Women Act, was enacted without the input of medical doctors and without the input of social scientists and without the input of abused men. So it is completely one-sided, and it is completely divorced from science. So my point
Okay,
is, for example,
I see where you're going now. I see where you're going now. And I see that you seem to think that the current studies and the current beliefs now, where people believe that the system is very pro men, you feel that that's wrong because there haven't been. It's almost as if they dismiss the idea of a battered husband. Is that what you're saying?
You said, are you saying the system is pro-man?
Yes.
The system is pro-woman.
I will, sir. I will disagree with you on that. I will disagree with you on that.
Well, the domestic violence system is completely pro-woman because it does not recognize men as victims of domestic violence. The Department of Justice offers zero funding to battered men. It offers 100% of its $1 billion annual budget towards women and women's group. So this is factual data point. So for you to arrive at that it is pro-man, it has no basis in facts.
Well, sir, do you not understand that like women don't? I'm sorry, what? Right, like Kelly said, where's that data, sir? Where is that data?
Where's what data?
The data that backs up everything you just said.
Okay, if you go to the website called www.domesticviolenceresearch.org, domesticviolenceresearch.org, on this website, they summarize nearly 2,000 peer-reviewed scientific studies. In all of these studies, they find that women perpetrate equal or greater domestic violence than men. Okay, and then 70% of these studies have been published by women with doctorates. So
yes, but who created that website?
Wait,
Who
hold
created
on.
that?
I'll get back to you on that one because I have already looked at that website and he's incorrect on what it says.
Ooh, fill us in.
I'm getting it. I had to come back to my computer.
I mean, nationally, the statistics are 95% of the domestic violence cases are women as victims. It's just
70% of these studies have been published by women with doctorates.
So what? Anybody can get a doctorate.
I was just going to say you're talking to two women right now who have doctorates. Thank you.
Okay. So these studies have been published, by people with doctorates. And the thing is, by ignoring this study, right now the domestic violence system has jeopardized the safety of women. It is not saving the lives of women. Just look at the facts from back in 1980, there were about 100 shelters for battered women. Today, there are 3,000 shelters for battered women.
It's almost as if violence against women has increased.
Yes.
No, it's almost as if men get away with it.
Despite going from 100 shelters to 3,000, these shelters have failed to save any lives of women. None whatsoever.
How can you say that? Where would that kind of study be posted?
They have not saved any lives of women. The data does not support that. What the shelters are doing is they're actually saving the lives of women. And this is what all the scientific studies show. Because what happens is, when shelters remove a battered woman from an abusive marriage, she no longer has to escape by killing her male abuser. So it's ending up saving the lives of men. The intimate partner homicides of men are down by 75%. There is no reduction in intimate partner homicides of women. What people who are part of the gender-based violence cult, they honestly believe that the shelters are saving the lives of women, even though there's no data that supports it. None. I mean, look at the intimate partner homicide data. The chart I sent to Andrew, It shows you clearly. It's in the FBI.gov website. All the Parker homicide data. So despite spending billions and billions of dollars on the shelters, because shelters are bigoted. I mean, think about Jim Crow. You had Ku Klux Klan shelters who welcomed white people but not blacks. Similarly, the shelters today, they welcome women but not men.
But they do welcome men.
Of women, but
They
don't
do welcome
men.
men. But okay, hold on. Go back to your statistics because I'm on your website that you said, okay? And if I recall correctly, you mentioned the word severe to Andrew. And it was about saying something like, women were, more, when there was severe abuse, that it was women who were doing it. Is that correct?
Okay, here's a study from Dr. Renee McDonald, published in 2006. I will send you the citation in an email. But in this study, she surveyed about 1,400 married couples and found that when it comes to severe domestic violence, twice as many wives perpetrated severe domestic violence than husbands, about 7.5% versus 3.2%.
Are you confusing bidirectional versus unidirectional? And also, that was 18 years ago.
Okay, this is not the only study. There are hundreds of such studies that consistently find that women perpetrate twice as much severe domestic violence than men. And
So you did say severe.
About 30 or so studies in the mail. Plus, this website has summarized many such studies. Now, the problem, Andrew, with feminist studies is they tend to be based on narrative. So they self-select and pre-select narratives of women who talk about being abused and battered, and then since they don't select stories of men being abused by women, the people in the gender-based violence cult, they start believing that only men abuse women. So when a man tries to present the data that there's gender equality, they go in disbelief because the religion is being
So if studies were presented with actual data and backed up, of course people would listen. It just sounds to me like whatever these studies were not presented correctly, or I don't know. What you're saying just doesn't make any sense, because if you're presenting a study and it's accurate and it's legitimate, of course people are going to listen to it. It just feels like you're cherry picking information to support your narrative.
Absolutely not. Because if you look at what the feminists do, is they cherry pick only those studies which are, and first of all, the feminist studies are based on narratives. They are not empirical. So they have a lot of stories of how this happened to this woman, this happened to this woman, and it's always the woman. So they cherry pick that the victim is always a woman, right? These are empirical studies with people with PhDs or MDs, and they're empirically based, scientifically researched studies. Now, what happens is when you go to present these studies, you have this whole VAWA mafia that starts to abuse doctors, and I will give you an example. Dr. Susan Steinmetz, back in 1979, published an article called Battered Husband Syndrome, in which she laid out 4 specific sample studies with which she consistently found that women perpetrated half of the domestic violence. So what these gender-based violence cults did is started a letter-writing campaign against her at the University of Delaware to deny her tenure. They called in bomb threats when she was speaking. They called in to boycott her. They put pressure on the media to not put her on air. So, and then a few years later, there's a Dr. Murray Strauss who published a bigger study with a huge sample size, which also found that women perpetrated more domestic violence than men. So they started false accusations against Dr. Murray Strauss that he beats up his wife or he sexually abuses his presence to them. All got proven false. But these are the underhanded tactics that feminists use to suppress and sweep these studies under the rug. And there are consequences for this dishonesty, because by doing this, you are denying help to female abusers. And when you deny help to female abusers, they are the ones who end up getting killed because they're abused and cannot go to a shelter and get help. I personally called a shelter in January 2009. They told me they don't help men. In fact, they gave me a number to call. When I called that number, it was a number to a group for male abusers, male batterers. But this is how screwed up this is. And
So you're still basing it off of something from back then versus stuff now, because I know for a fact that I just helped somebody. I helped a male with getting into a shelter because they absolutely were accepted. Not all of them do, and that's their right as a business to not take men in, particularly in those types of situations.
Yeah, the question is, why did the shelter reject you?
right not to take them.
Right?
That's the question I have. Why did the shelter reject you?
What's that?
Why did the shelter reject you? Did they give you a reason?
No, I called the Haven House shelter in Buffalo, New York, and I tried to explain my situation to them. And the lady on the phone said, "We help only women, so this is a shelter for women, and I'll give you a number to call." So I called that number, and it turned out there was a number to a batterer's organization.
Okay.
And then
So it's not that they rejected you. It's not that they rejected your story. You called an all-woman shelter. That's why they rejected you. And then they gave you a number to a shelter for abusers, or for a line for an organization for abusers. Why did they do that?
Am I talking to Amy?
You have 1 minute left.
Okay, so I guess I called about to end, so I'll call back. Basically, again, these shelters operate under the gender-based violence theory, that COPPA. So there's ample amount of research that they don't help.
Okay, but sir, here's the thing. You got forwarded to a organization for abused men, and then you unalived your wife and cut off her head. I wonder if there's a correlation there. Do you think there's a correlation there?
I got forwarded to an organization that was for male batterers, not
Correct.
abused.
Correct. And then you unalived a woman. You unalived your wife.
You're a man, you can only be the abuser, and that's bigotry. That's total.
Well, no, I don't believe that only men. I don't believe that only men can be abusers. Absolutely not. We just spent months covering the Menendez case, so we know.
And I
God
said
bless you.
that earlier.
Right? Like we absolutely believe. I absolutely believe that men can be abused. Absolutely. I'm questioning whether you were, only because I'm not really. You're talking about studies and this and that. I want to hear what happened to you.
It cut him off, by the way.
What I said was, a woman hits a man, she leaves a bruise. Okay, statistically, this is the most likely scenario that I've seen. A man hits a woman, he could kill her with a punch.
Correct.
And so my issue is, I have a tendency to believe women over men simply because of the physical part of it.
Correct.
Correct.
And-
And I said that to him too, but now he's going to say that you're doing what I did, which is diagnosing based on size, because he says that it's about psychological, not physical.
Well, and it could, and there are, let's put it this way, obviously there are psychological aspects to abuse, but psychological aspects don't end up with somebody no longer alive. They could unalive themselves, I suppose. But that's
I think this.
that doesn't end up with somebody not alive anymore because you psychologically abuse them. It's not right. It's domestic violence. There's no doubt about it. But it doesn't end up in someone deceased.
Right, because in an emotional abuse, there isn't the fear of it. Is he talking?
Yeah.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
How domestic violence works when women do. Yes, men are bigger and stronger than women, but female abusers use household objects like fireplace pokers, baseball bats, screwdrivers, knives, and other objects to compensate for the physical size difference. So actually, when it comes to severe injuries, men suffer significantly higher severe injuries from domestic violence. And actually, at my jury selection, there was an intensive care unit nurse who was asked a question about having domestic violence patients, and the judge said, so obviously all those patients were women. So she said, no, half of them were men.
Here's my question. Here's another question I have. How do we know that all these cases that you're talking about where the woman allegedly is the abuser, how do we know it wasn't reactive abuse? How do we know that she wasn't actually defending herself? And see, when you say that the system is pro-woman, it absolutely is not, sir. Because I guarantee you, in a lot of those cases, that woman was defending herself, but because she's a woman, right? Because she's a woman, and she must be crazy if she did that. So then she's labeled an abuser.
See, that's another misconception you have, and this is part of the indoctrination that you receive from the gender-based violence cult. And that indoctrination is that, and this is exactly what my judge said on the transcript, that when he went through his judicial training on domestic violence, and he made these comments after reading the article by Dr. Donald Dutton, because by this time he was mocking the feminist theory of domestic violence. He basically said that what he was trained is that only men are violent creatures, and if the woman is violent, she's acting in self-defense, right? So that's the brainwashing that you are given, and you end up believing that brainwashing. How do we overcome that brainwashing of yours? What we did.
Well, because no. Because oftentimes women are responding to stimuli, sir.
Don't interrupt. Let me finish.
Right.
In which they ask women that when they perpetrate their domestic violence, what was their motivation? In all of those studies, they consistently found that women self-reported that their motivation was control and power over motives, and the least common answer was self-defense. So all these scientific studies exist, and they empirically disprove the brainwashing that the gender-based violence cult provides to you. So what happens is once you've been indoctrinated by this gender-based violence virus, you immediately think that whenever there's an intimate partner homicide, if a woman is killed, then she must be the victim. But if the man is killed, then the woman was the victim who's acting in self-defense. That is also not true. Let me give you 3 examples, right?
Oh, God. All right.
Of New Mexico is a kid. She ended up beheading her husband while he was sleeping, right?
I have a question.
We have a question, Mo.
She cut his head off.
Andrew, tell him shush.
Then she
Mo.
used the battered spouse in
Mo.
defense, and she was acquitted. Yeah?
I have a question. You're talking about indoctrination via outside influences and things like that. What about somebody who's actually had the experience of being punched in the face by a man? That's not indoctrination. That's personal experience.
This is another erroneous thinking that you have. You're working with anecdotal data. Anecdotal data is junk science. What you need to work with is empirical data that collects a whole bunch of science. and a whole
But
bunch
but
of
Mo, that website that you
right?
use,
Because
that
Andrew, this is the key problem with the feminist theories. All they talk about is the narrative. You know, I got punched, I got this, I got punched too, right? I got
hey,
attacked with knives. I got
but
attacked with
you
this,
do
all that.
realize that this website that you're constantly referring to has things on here like it has like 8 studies showed. Oh, 8 studies? 8 studies. You know what? Do you not realize too that we can put together studies to make it show whatever we want? If I wanted to show that men do what you did and don't answer questions and things like that, I could put it together with a study of one. And I can publish it and I can say that my sample size, I'll make you out to be 2,500. I don't care. But there have been plenty of studies out there that have been proven to be unreliable.
That kind of data manipulation, is very common in feminist studies, and actually scientists have given a name. It's called Muzzammil effect. What feminists like you do when you prepare studies is and what of their studies do is they tend to refer to some empirical data and they provide a citation. But when you go to the citation, you find out there's no empirical data there. It's just another opinion by another feminist. So they're converting opinion into data, and this kind of problem is so widespread in feminist hokum that scientists refer to it as Muzzammil effect. And in this article,
What scientist does that?
Studies by domestic violence, it talks about Muzzammil effects. This is exactly what this lady is talking about. It's complete total manufacturing of data, because all they do is work with empirical. But look at the proof in the pudding. Look at the intimate partner homicide data, which cannot be manipulated by feminists. Right? Since that data cannot be manipulated by the feminists, that data is simply censored by them. Censored by
I have another question for
because
you.
that data shows that despite wasting $50 billion on these domestic violence coalitions, they have saved 0 lives of women. It's the biggest fraud in the world. Every single day, 3 to 4 women are getting killed. Every single day. And these feminists have failed to save any lives in 50 years. They're a total fraud. And then, this is not the only thing. Worldwide, 137 women are killed every single day by their intimate partners or family members, and this number has doubled since 2002 under the watch of feminists. They are destroying the lives of women.
Who's killing us? Who's killing us?
You are destroying them because you are
Oh, is it woman on woman crime?
I don't think so.
completely garbage
I don't think so, sir.
I mean,
Was your wife a feminist?
I have another question for you, though. I have another question for you, though. How do you think that your level of violence is justified? Because you could have done something much less than what you did.
will you let me answer it, or will you interrupt again?
I am completely silent right now.
Okay, please be that way because, so you can understand things. All right?
Okay.
This law called Maryland versus Sloan, which is 844 Atlantic 2D 429, in which the judge explains that a particularly disturbing characteristic of homicide by battered spouse syndrome victims is the overkill factor. Rarely is the abuser killed with a single clean shot. Most often, the battered spouse will shoot, club, stab the abuser numerous times. All right? And Andrew, I'm also going to send you this chart that lists.
When was that case?
The battered spouse syndrome.
When was that case?
Okay.
When was that case?
Maryland versus Smolin, 844 Atlantic.2D 429. All right? So,
What year?
Andrew, I'll send you 2004. Andrew, I'll send you this chart that lists overkill by battered spouse syndrome. It has about 24 cases, which describes in cases where women, when they kill their husband, There are 26 stab wounds, 65 stab wounds. There's so many stab wounds.
But wait a minute.
It's almost like
you.
when you're repeatedly and systematically, persistently abused. You've got a little rage stored up.
Very good. But that rage can also exist in men when they're being abused. So when battered men kill, they also overkill. But when you're a bigot, you cannot see that men will respond the same way. When you're a bigot, you only see that women can respond that way, but your bigoted mind does not allow you to see.
But the difference is that men very effortlessly express rage. So why would it be pent up? See, for women, we can't, because we fear for our lives. Men, you get to be rageful every day, all day, flitting around, rage. We can't do that.
Andrew, this is pure bigotry coming out. This is her opinion, right? She has never talked to an abused man. She doesn't know how abused men react.
On the contrary, sir. On the contrary, I absolutely have. I've had clients that are abused men. Please.
I mean, if you had known this stuff, you would not have asked me why the overkill happens. Overkill happens in almost
We keep asking you about your case, and you don't stick to the facts of your case.
We're talking about your case.
Anger builds up into a thing, rage, and then also the fear has built up to a level of terror. And also, overkill happens because in the brain, the rage circuit tilts over the frontal cortex, which is the psychological brain.
So Mo, can we go back to your case? Because let's go back to Mo. Go back to your case, please. We don't need to hear. You're just spewing bullshit at this point.
So this is what's going on.
Andrew, I'm so sorry at all the emails you're going to get.
Try to explain their situation. You run into this wall of bigotry, which only says this can only happen to. This can only be done by women, but not men. So when you
your wife filed for divorce 6 days before you killed her. Your wife filed for divorce 6 days before you killed her, correct?
Okay.
So your wife was trying to get away from you, and yet you're still saying that I can't. I literally can't. Can you please stick to your case instead of citing all these other ones? Can we go to at least the question of, are we supposed to assume that what you're telling us is true if you didn't raise this in your own case? You represented yourself, so you had the ability to raise all of these things. Did you?
Okay, if you don't interrupt me like an abuser interrupts constantly, then I can provide you an answer. But if you're going to behave abusively...
You know what?
Oh,
you
wow.
don't talk down to us.
This is exactly what you are. No, because this is what scientific studies say, that domestic violence advocates are abusers. And when
but do you notice how just listening to you has made 4 women extremely angry? Just listening to you. This is the reaction that you have. This is the reaction women have when they talk to you. Why is that?
It doesn't happen. So if you ask me a question, let me answer your question without...
Why don't you shut up and actually answer the damn question?
So you keep interrupting like an abuser does, and that's the
You
point.
keep talking all over the place instead of actually answering a question. It's no wonder you're in prison. I guarantee you sat in that court and talked a whole bunch of shit instead of just talking about your freaking case.
See, there you go. Out of control, rage, abuser.
Here we go.
Oh, yeah.
No.
Yeah, that's me.
No,
This is what I mean.
It's possible that statistically you have 4 women right now who are this angry.
The problem with you is that you don't understand how women abuse men. One of the
I very much do, sir.
Just
I
answer the
very
question.
much do. I very much do.
Again, you interrupted.
But yes,
But
this
you
time I
realize
am.
that 2 of us are lawyers that represent people in court that have been abused. So we know exactly how it happens, and so does character.
Yes, and we're all responding to stimuli, sir. This is what responding to stimuli looks like. What you call, I don't know, whatever, you crazy feminist, is women being patient and patient and patient no, and just being talked down to and treated poorly until they react to that stimuli, and then you go, oh, see, you're crazy. That's what narcissists do. That's what toxic types do.
This is exactly what happens to battered men. They are talked down and again and shut down and interrupted and not allowed to talk, and then eventually they snap. So
Character, you need to understand the fake battered spouse syndrome cult that he's in.
But But he just said it. He's like, this is what what's what battered husbands deal with the interruptions and the this and the that. Sir, I believe that, and I believe that happened to you because of you.
So you asked me a question, and now you're not letting me answer the question. You asked me the question that 6 days before.
And you're still giving
You're just deflecting. You're deflecting. Just answer the question, sir.
This is a person that has an incredible need to control.
So please
yes,
interrupt and listen for a change, okay? So what happens in the case of battered husband syndrome and a nuclear weapon of female
talk
abuse.
about your case.
Talk
We
about
don't
your
care.
case, sir. Talk about your case. I am. We
hear
are.
about you.
Suck it up. Just answer your case, sir. Talk about your case. We're not interested in all this. We're not. Talk about your case,
We
sir.
want to hear about your case. We want to hear about you.
About my case. But first you need to understand the framework that a nuclear
The framework is that you
We
read all
understand.
these other cases so that you can
Right.
build your character.
and the domestic
Right.
violence restraining
You're deflecting. You're avoiding accountability. Talk about your case. Nobody here is interested in all this other stuff you're talking about. Talk about your case.
and exposing the abuser. So she was constantly, I was detailing in detailed emails the abusive behaviors of Aasiya. Right? So Aasiya sends me an email that I need to stop this email communication, otherwise she will get a domestic violence restraining order. Now look how brilliant the judges are in America. That we're hearing both sides of the story to issue restraining orders. This is stupidity on steroids. This is exactly what feminists do.
So why was she telling you to stop contacting her? Why would she need a restraining order if she was the abuser? Why? Why would she need a restraining order if she was the abuser?
So for the abuser, fear of exposure is worse than fear of death. So when she fears this exposure, she runs off, gets a domestic violence restraining order, files for divorce to protect herself from getting exposed. And that's a weapon that's used by female abusers.
So you think that a woman would put herself in a financial position or a position, you think a woman would put herself in that position to have her life completely turned upside down, right? And then probably have to take the kids on her own and all of it. Her entire life would be, do you have any idea how much women give up when they get divorced?
Mm-hmm.
And so you think she's doing that on the off chance that you're going to accuse her of abuse?
Millions of women are using domestic violence restraining orders and divorce as a false pretense. You need to read research by Dr. Denise Hines. All right? 80% of the domestic violence-related divorces and domestic violence restraining orders are completely false.
Did you say 80%? 80%.
Completely brainwashed.
80%.
What? Bro, what? Nah.
Abusers, let me give you some data about female abusers.
Oh my God, with the data. I'm sick of the data. I'm sick of it. I want to hear about your case.
Exactly.
Talk about your case.
Because in your mind, you have a preconceived notion that only women are abused and women are
Incorrect. We've established this several times. We have said we absolutely believe men can be abused. Talk about your case. Talk about, see, you just don't like the idea that a woman is telling you what to do. That's what this comes down to. You hate it.
Advocating the gender-based violence cult. Nothing else. It's all cult doctrine. It's all cult doctrine. You're working with narratives. You're working with stories. You're not working with data. And this is your problem. This is why you have failed to save any lives of women. And when I try to give you data, when I try to show you the email...
How did your data save the wife? Your wife?
You don't want to listen. You interrupt. Because
how? answer that, please. How did the data save your wife's life?
For a trial. There was a reporter, Claudine Ewing from WGRZ, who's an NBC affiliate, came to talk to me, and I shared with her several emails. Right in one of the emails, I'm talking about how I'm feeling like a hostage at the mercy of a terrorist. So Claudine Ewing publishes or television or broadcasts all of this information. The feminists got so upset that they raided the poor judge. And the judge is saying on the transcript that this information is inflammatory to domestic violence advocates. So the moment an abused man tries to present his evidence of domestic violence by a woman, these feminists on your call, it's inflammatory to them because in their bigoted, brainwashed mind, they cannot conceptualize women as abusers. And the reason they cannot conceptualize is because they don't read research. They have never read any research. So there's an article or letter I'm sending to you, which is dated December 12th. I've already mailed it to you last month. It's headed Voices of Voiceless Abused Men. And that article detailed several dozen men and their experiences of domestic violence.
Okay, all right, I believe you, sir. I believe you. Can we please talk about your case? What led up to it? What led up to it? What led up to it?
How do you know if this is true? How do you know when a woman is saying is true? Oh, because if she tells it to the domestic violence advocates, then it's true. But the domestic violence
Well, you're telling us. So you're telling us right now. Are we supposed to just go, oh, well, it's true because you're telling us?
None.
Because you're applying double standards here because I don't buy your bullshit.
Look, the proof is in the pudding. You have not saved
The proof's in the pudding. You're in prison and she's dead.
the intimate partner homicide data. It was 1,200 per year since in 1975. It's still 1,200 per year in 2025. Now, during this 50-year period, the intimate partner homicides of men have declined by 75%. It went from 1,200 down to 300. So the intelligent person will ask the question, well, what happened that the intimate partner homicides of husbands has declined by 75%, even though we have spent more money on it. We've given them no domestic violence advocates. We've given them no funding. We've given them no services. We don't take guns away from female abusers. Yet all this huge reduction has happened. That's what an intelligent person will ask. But Amy is obviously not an intelligent woman, so she doesn't ask that question. Because she's a bigot. She just doesn't want to look at the reason this happens.
Oh, my God.
A battered woman, then she no longer has to kill her abusive husband. So if you were not
So
a bigot,
again, sir, the proof's in the pudding, right? The proof is in the pudding. You're in prison, your wife is not alive, and you did that.
They're always overkill. And that's the biggest problem you have done, is because your bigotry prevents you from seeing men as equal.
Oh, my
victims
God.
of domestic violence, if not greater.
I said they are. I just said you're not.
At Columbia University, it says domestic violence is the only area of violence perpetration where women significantly outnumber men. But because
Andrew, he's probably typing away right now.
they will not work with abused men. They will not. Amanda Schneezer, in her law review article, in the Syracuse Law Review article, talks about that abused men are turned away without sympathy by the shelters and domestic violence agencies. This is the problem. And judges, in judicial opinion, frequently cite every 15 seconds a woman is battered. But the same judge is not telling you that the same study finds that every 14 seconds a man is being abused. That data is censored. Why? Because it's inflammatory to feminist bigots. So when you keep censoring this kind of information, you create a polluted mindset that cannot accept gender equality in domestic violence. You earlier said that you do concede that bad childhood experiences create future abusers. A lot of abusers are abandoned as children. They were abused as children. And they repeat the same cycle again. So, Andrew, this is an important question. What happens to girls who are raised in an abusive home? Do they not become abusers?
No, they tend to get with
Not all the
abusers.
time.
Were you an abused child?
So no, I was not, but my wife was very severely, and this was all documented in emails as well as in psychiatric counseling sessions. Her childhood abuse by her mother is very heavily documented. All right.
So then she found somebody like one of her parents.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Because
That's
she thought it was
exactly what
normal.
happens. Yes.
That is what happened.
You're up
That is what
against
happens.
abusers. When you're up against female abusers like yourself, as a female abuser.
Hold up. Wait a minute. What?
I don't know what he said because I'm not smart.
I just heard female abusers like yourself.
Why the number has declined by 75%? The number has declined by 75% because of this. Because you're not helping. So the only way to reduce...
Men are helping, obviously. Men are what's helping.
Recognize men as equal victims and start helping them. And as long as we have kids running domestic violence, this will not happen. Because their agenda is to get money for themselves and they're exploiting women. They're falsely telling that men do all those things. Well, women do the same things in equal numbers. Because female and male abusers are created because of childhood abuse and childhood abandonment. That's the basic principle. But this theory doesn't sink into the feminist mind because the feminist mind is solely focused on demonizing men. And that is why, as long as the domestic violence policy is in the hands of bigots like you, unfortunately, 4 women will keep getting killed every single day. You have failed to reduce this number in 50 years. So there's absolutely no credibility.
I thought it just went down by 75%.
None whatsoever. I mean, you have failed, totally failed. The FBI's intimate partner homicide data very clearly shows that you have completely failed. The reason you have failed is because you're a man-hating bigot. As a man-hating bigot,
Or it's that men have been encouraged to be violent, and they get off. They get off when they get away with it. Or
who have killed it. Okay, Andrew, this is another example. Barbara Sheehan in 2011 in Queens, killed her husband with 11. So she could have just walked out the door. Why didn't she? Because in the mind of a battered spouse syndrome, they feel trapped. They feel unable to walk out. So this is what happens. So when a woman does it, they accept it. But when a man does the same thing, their mind goes bonkers because their bigotry cannot allow them to accept men as equal victims. And this is the root problem in domestic violence is these bigots like Amy Davis and Kelly and whoever else is on.
Oh my God.
You want me to call back?
I think we're gonna wrap in a few minutes, but I'm gonna